Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you something called URL escaping. And we've already seen that if you can send small amounts of data to a server by appending URL parameters, and a URL has a kind of format that looks like this. So you've got the URL and then a question mark, and then you can have pairs of parameters where you have a parameter name followed by an equal sign and then a value, and you can have multiple pairs of those separated by ampersands. And by the way, I have to apologize if you can hear banging or sawing during this tutorial, but it seems like no matter where I go in this world, there's always an apartment next to me or opposite me that's being renovated. It just seems to be an eternal law of the universe as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so you can have pairs of parameters separated by ampersands, and that's good for sending small amounts of data, and there is a limit as to how much data you can send in a URL, so you don't want to try sending entire sort of pages of data like that. But now, besides the kind of fact that you can't send a lot of data, I think the limit used to be 255 characters, and it may be bigger than that now, but even so you're kind of taking a big chance if you try to put wadges of data in the URL. And besides that problem, there's the other problem that you might have special characters in the URL. So in the parameters themselves, because in the URL we've got special characters that have special meanings, like these forward slashes, and of course the question mark and ampersands and equal signs. And what if you've got data that you want to send that's got those special characters in it? And in that case you need to escape the data. And to do that is pretty simple. And let's just take an example here. I'm going to have a password, so I'll say string password, because passwords often have crazy characters in them. And let's have a password that's got all kinds of weird stuff in it, so like as weird as we can make it, basically. And I'll save that and I'll append this to the URL, so we'll have another parameter here. So let's say plus, and then I'll say ampersand pass equals, and let's append the value here for the password. And by the way, something that I should also mention is that you should be very, very careful about taking, in fact you should never take values from that have been supplied on a URL and use them directly in your program uncritically, because in particular you should never take values from a URL and append them into some SQL, because people will use that to hack your database. And you should always use wildcards in your SQL if you're using parameters from a URL. So be aware that a user can type anything in a URL. Okay, so we've got this weird string of characters, and we're appending that for a password and trying to pass it in the URL. And let's go to the kind of receiving end now, and I've got another Eclipse set up here. You can run two Eclipses at the same time if you want. And here's my server program, which is a servlet, but as we've seen it could be like a PHP file or something. And I'm going to say here string password equals request.get parameter, and the name I gave to the parameter was pass, or it could just be P, because there's no harm in having very sort of short cryptic URLs, and if anything it might discourage people from hacking, which is always a good thing. Although a serious hacker will figure out what your URL means and will use it to upset your program if he or she can. It's probably going to be a he, but who knows. So here I'm going to say if ID is null, or if password now is null, password, I'm going to say no password, and otherwise I'm going to say else out.println password is, and password, and let's just see what happens here. So I'll export this. There don't seem to be any errors. There are no compile errors in it, and I'll export it to a WAR file, and I'll make that WAR file Android server demo.war on my desktop and click finish. And then let's go to CloudBees here and upload a new WAR file for this application. So I'll go to desktop and Android server demo.war, and I probably should install the CloudBees API, because then I could avoid some of the slowness of uploading a new WAR file, but I'll stick with this just for the moment. So deploying to the cloud, and there we go, and it's refreshing, and let's go to the right URL. So the base URL is at the top here, and I think my actual servlet is called server, and it says no ID, no password. So let's give it a password. Well, let's give it an ID as well, just for the hell of it. So I could supply either or neither or both parameters, but I'll say ID equals 7 and password equals actually it was just pass, the name of the parameter, equals hello. So that works. And now let's try running my application and interfacing with this. So to do that, what I'll do is I will so let's go back to the phone application here. So we're reading information from the server and printing it out in using log.d in the debug. So we're going to see hopefully that HTML is going to come back in log.d if I run this application. So let's click run, and I'll look at the console down here. Okay, now it's running, and we'll go to DDMS and see what the result is. So it says password is LJ equals LJ, but if I go back to Java, that's not the password I supplied. And actually what's happening in this case is it's interpreting the ampersand here as the start of a new parameter, but there are so many ways that special characters like this could screw up your data that you're sending to a URL. So if you've got a any kind of parameter value and it's got any kind of weird characters in other than just numbers and letters, you need to escape those numbers or letters, and the way to do that is you can use a class called URL encoder. There we go, and that's got a static method with these Eclipse errors called encode. It actually has this encode method which is deprecated, and you're supposed to use this other method, this sort of overloaded version of encode, which takes the encoding type, and the encoding type is UTF-8, which is the kind of mechanism that Java uses for encoding characters. So UTF-8, I'm not sure what it stands for, Unicode something or other, 8-bit, I don't know. Can't be 8-bit actually, but anyway, leaving that aside, or maybe it can, I don't know. So we'll call URL encoder.encode, and we'll pass the stuff we want to encode as the first parameter. Let's just run this, and for the second parameter just pass the string UTF in capitals -8 as it tells you to in the documentation. And now let's see what difference that makes. So I'll go to DDMS in just a second. Okay, so now the application's running. You can see it here, but it's not very exciting. And in fact, I think what I'm going to do is probably put a button on there so that I can make it run the internet stuff at the touch of a button, because it's kind of annoying having to rerun it every time that I remember I've left my Wi-Fi connection switched off or something, and it doesn't work. So let's look at DDMS now, and now we can see that the server program has correctly picked up the password, So if I look at this, it's LJ equals, and it ends in KJ/. And if I go to the Java view, we can see that's exactly what I specified. So by encoding the URL, the server has been able to get the parameter, and I didn't have to decode it at the other end. That's sort of automatically happened, but now it's correctly got my parameter and it's echoed it back to me, and my Android program running on my phone is now displaying the output from the server. There's also a URL decode which you might not need because, well, I don't know if you need it or not actually. You might not need it. As you can see, often decoding just sort of happens automatically when you do get parameter in your server or whatever. But there is a URL decoder, .decode I think it is, as well, that decodes back into the original string. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial, and join me again next time, and until then, happy coding.